Hey guys, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about a legend in American cutlery. And I think at the time you don't really know you were a legend. I don't think this guy would think that he was a legend, but certainly he deserves that status because of his achievements. Some of you may have already figured that out. If you're looking at this tang stamp right here, this is a John Russell knife, and that's who we're going to be talking about today, John Russell. This is his famous R with the arrow through it, trademark. And for transparency's sake, these three knives are John Russell knives. This knife right here is unmarked. I believe it to be a John Russell knife. It's a pattern that he produced. I think this knife was cut down. It's been double-sided. And I think they took off the tang stamp when they did that. This knife here is an E.C. Simmons knife, pre-1940. And E.C. Simmons sold John Russell knives. And I think that John Russell probably made this for E.C. Simmons. This knife here is an Ontario knife, Old Hickory. But this is a pattern that's very similar to what John Russell pioneered in the type of butcher knives that were coming into America. The British made knives exactly like this also. A number of other manufacturers did too. This was a common butcher knife pattern. But that's why I included it, just so you can see kind of like the knives that he was producing. So let's just start out at the beginning. John Russell is born in 1797 in Greenfield, Massachusetts. So right there's a problem. A lot of the sources that you look at, including Goins, says he was born in Deerfield, Massachusetts. But the resources are kind of split. Some say he was born in Greenfield, some say Deerfield. And the Greenfield Historical Society says he was born in Greenfield. Those are local people with local records, and I kind of believe them. And also the story makes better sense if he's from Greenfield, because he established his cutlery shop on the Green River, which is a little south and east of Greenfield and about 30 miles away from Deerfield. So I think he was born in Greenfield. But in 1818, at the age of 21, he leaves to seek his fortune. We next find him in Atlanta, and he's speculating on cotton, where he had a couple rough years, but overall he made a fortune. So by the time he's 32 years old, he's rich enough to retire as a young man. He's found in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, marries in 1830, and kind of retires then. So in 1832, he goes back to Greenfield to just visit his family. He hadn't worked in a couple years. He told them he was eager to start a new business, and they persuaded him to stay in Greenfield, saying there's a lot of opportunity there. Greenfield sits on the confluence of 5 rivers, so a lot of opportunity. And as it turned out, Greenfield turned out to be a great industrial center. that whole area, Franklin County in Massachusetts. So he stays there and he decides that he wants to get into cutlery. So at this point, you have a 35-year-old man who's never not a cutler, has no cutler training, has never been exposed to the business, and he's decided that's what I want to do with the rest of my life. And that in itself is remarkable. So he does do that. And his first factory he completed in 1833. And his whole purpose was to make knives. He wanted to make knives. But he started out making chisels and axes just to get that experience of working with the metals in. Chisel and axes are a lot easier to make than knives. And his first factory, though, was pretty good. It was small, but he had a steam engine that he used to run the mill, and he had 2 to 3 trip hammers, and one row of grindstones and one row of emery stones. So already his cutlery shop is better equipped than most cutlery shops in England. There were thousands of them in England. Only a few had their own trip hammers. Usually that work was done in a separate place, and grindstones were located in a separate place. So the English had a whole different philosophy about making knives. And right from the start, Americans, not only John Russell, but others, wanted to go down the factory setting, mass production ideas for knife making. And so he's set up pretty good to make knives. In 1834, just a year after he starts, he decides, I'm going to go ahead and start making knives. And he started making butcher knives and kitchen cutlery after that. And that same year, he adds another steam engine. But as the story unfolds, you're going to see John Russell was a pretty smart man. And right away, he figured that the steam engines are just too expensive to run. You have to feed them with coal or wood. You have to have somebody there to work on them and attend to them. And so a lot of people in that area were already using water power, and he decided to move his operation to the Green River. He bought some property and built a factory on the Green River. And by 1836, that was up and running. And this factory improved on his old factory. So a fire happens in the forges and severely damages the building. He has to stop production. He did get insurance money, $4,000 in insurance money to do the repairs. But before he could effect the repairs, a flood wipes out the whole building. All he's left with is the property and some of the machinery that he was able to salvage. So a wealthy businessman from New York City named Henry Clapp comes to the rescue with $10,000 and basically becomes John Russell's partner. John Russell runs the business, and Henry Clapp was there for him to run ideas by, ask advice on, things like that. So Henry Clapp really had nothing to do with the business. So in 1836, John Russell builds an even bigger factory than the one he had just built. This factory has 3 buildings. The first building is for forging. Smart idea in case there's another forge fire. It only destroys that building. So he has forge in one building, and he has 12 trip hammers in that building, the forge building. These trip hammers are a way to rapidly forge a knife. If you watch Forge and Fire, most knife makers today use trip hammers where they don't have to pound on the knife as much. It's a lot quicker way to forge a blade. He's increased his capacity by 4 times, and he has 70 grindstones and 100 emery stones in a separate building, building number 2. Building number 3 is 2 stories, and the bottom story is for hardening and tempering, and the top story is for cutting and hefting the blades. So this is Coca-Cola wood right here, and they need to cut that out. Sorry, we had an earthquake here. They need to cut that out and form it for the knife, and that's what they were doing in that building. So this is a pretty big operation. If you know anything about English cutlery, you know having all of these things right there in a factory setting, it is uncommon to the English way of making knives. There's a few manufacturers who are moving in that direction, but most of them hadn't even touched the level that John Russell has at this point. And he's apparently very successful at this point. Records are kind of hard to come by, but just in the fact of the capacity that he's building, you can see he's ambitious and he's looking at big things. And by 1840, John Russell is producing a ton of knives. He's really smart, so he's paying cutlers $10 a week for the first 6 months, and then after that, they can be paid by piece. And a good cutler making by piece can make $25 to $30 a week. This is a tremendous amount of money for cutlers at this time. The $10 is twice what Sheffield cutlers are making. So they can really make a lot of money, and he does this to collect the talent that he needs to make really good knives. So his idea, he's using really good materials. The steel he's using is English steel. He's using Coca-Cola and ebony handles. He also made pearl and horn, but they cost more. And this simple type of knife is really what won the West and what mountain men really carried. And to give you some idea of his success, in 1835, the British targeted John Russell and started dumping knives in America. These type of knives here started dumping them below cost. So they're selling them for less than it costs to make. And the sole purpose was to put John Russell out of business. These records are clear if you look at the English records. And there was George Westinghouse mentioned John Russell, what a threat that he was. Several other people did. And the guild took action against that. In 1837, they had to stop because of a financial crisis they had in England. But in 1940, they started again. So John Russell is definitely having an impact on the English knife trade in America. And as commenters try to temper that down, saying that he only sold a percentage of knives, which is true, he had a tremendous impact, not only against the English in defeating their dominance in the United States, but also as a leader. He's providing that leadership, showing people, hey, we can do this. And so cutlery blossomed in Connecticut at that point in time, in Massachusetts, and the number of cutlers producing knives quadrupled within years, just in a couple years. And so his impact really can't be understated. And to those who would say that he really didn't have an impact on the British, between 1940 and 1960, John Russell sold 750,000 of these Green River skinning knives. And in a state census that was taken, his capital in 1860 or 1870 was $75,000. And that's about $1.7 million in today's dollars. So that's just the capital that he had. He made $750,000 in sales. So John Russell was selling a lot of knives. In 1840, you can find receipts from French trading posts where they bought John Russell knives, 1,400 of them at a time. The last receipt that was found was in 1859, and that was a $700 purchase of knives from John Russell. So he's not only selling in America, he's selling to French fur traders, mountain men, and he was very, very successful with these knives. So in 1840, John Russell attracts a Sheffield cutler named Matthew Chapman. Matthew Chapman was not only a Sheffield cutler, he was a mechanical genius. It was really very fortunate for John Russell to get a hold of this guy. And Matthew Chapman develops all kinds of machines for John Russell. A knife blanking machine, that's where you're cutting out the whole blade. You don't have to forge the blade out. And he developed a leveling machine to level the blades, make them smooth before you grind them. A machine to punch the holes for the pins in the knife blank. He developed a fork bending machine that not only bent the forks but cut them at the same time, and also a handle cutting machine, so they could cut them rapidly and heft them and then sand them out. So all these machines are making him more and more productive. John Russell's cutlers, as compared to English cutlers, which were very, very good, they were 15 times more productive than, meaning they could produce 15 times more knives than the same amount of men in England. So he was very productive. That allowed him to sell his knives. These knives sold for 15 to 25 cents, $1.50 to $3.50 per dozen, depending on what the handle material was. Obviously, pearl and horn are going to cost more than just wood, but he used cocobolo and ebony wood, and so very, very high-end materials in his knives, but sold them for relatively cheap. And that was because of the work that he did to make his factory so productive. And these are things that he deserved to be called a legend for. And so in 1868, John Russell is approached by Turner Falls officials. This is a little to the east and north of Greenfield, and it sits on the Connecticut River, which is much bigger and more powerful than the Green River, allowing him to produce more because he has more power. He builds a factory there that can accommodate 1,000 workmen. It's state of the art, the factory. It has a lot of modern conveniences. In 1868, when the factory is complete, he has 500 people working in it. And so he's really set up to be a major producer of knives. In 1873, he sells the company, supposedly bankrupt, but I read you the figures of his 1870 finances. It doesn't look like he's bankrupt at all. But I think you have to remember in 1873, John Russell is 76 years old. And I think really that was the reason why he got rid of the business. But the new owners did restructure the business. And they named the new company John Russell Cutlery Company. So previously, John Russell's company was John Russell Manufacturing Company. So a lot starts to happen once new owners take over this company, and that frequently happens because you have new blood. And John Russell's old. He's probably not very involved in this company. by the time 1870 comes around. And in 1875, a lot of these trademarks we're familiar with start popping up. In 1876, the diamond trademark came up, where you have the diamond R diamond is trademarked in 1876. This is trademarked in 1879, and a number of other ones. In 1884, they have a trademark that's a diamond, and on top you have Russell cutlery, and on the bottom you have Green River of that diamond. Also around that time, I think 1879, the Atlas stamp comes out. This is like a Paragon type building with Atlas holding the world, and on top is Russell cutlery, and on the bottom Green River. So all these trademarks are coming out rapidly around this time frame. By 1884, John Russell Company is producing 400 different models of pocket knives. So this is the area where some people, they attribute Russell with spreading this Barlow knife throughout America. Most people that carried a Barlow, they were carrying a Russell Barlow. They produced mass quantities of these, but it didn't happen until the new owners took control of the company. So John Russell produced very few pocket knives actually, and they weren't produced in regular production until 1875, when the new owners entered them into the regular production of the company. So there's nothing really premium or special about any of these John Russell knives. They're just good knives. So they were never really high-end knives, but they were very popular with people. They were affordable, durable, rugged, and they just worked. And he sold a lot of them, and so did the Russell Cutlery Company. So in 1917, as the United States enters World War I, production of the pocket knives stopped, and they resume in 1920, but the owner was ill and had to sell the company. I don't know who bought the company, probably principals that were already in the company, because there's no mention of that. So in 1920, production resumes on the pocket knives. And by 1923, they're offering a full line of pocket knives again. In 1933, Russell merges with Harrington Cutlery. Harrington Cutlery started before John Russell. Henry Harrington started in 1818. It's an old, respected cutlery company, mainly producing kitchen cutlery. And so John Russell is a good merge for them, because they're producing other kind of things, hunting knives and pocket knives. But in 1941, as the United States enters the Second World War, Russell-Harrington Company has to stop production of pocket knives because of the war, and they never make pocket knives after the war. So if you're familiar with that time frame, that's a time frame when the American cutlery industry kind of collapsed, and pocket knives were just not selling like they were before. And so Russell Harrington continued to make Russell hunting knives, but not the pocket knives after the war. In that period between 1940 and 1950, Russell-Harrington did accept the old Barlow knives and agreed to overhaul them, and they did that for $1. And so those knives have a special tang stamp. It's an R Russell with a line underneath it. I put pictures in there for you to see, and that was only used on these Barlow knives that were replaced. And the blades also on the back of the tang have second put onto them. And that's how you can tell one of those knives that have been worked on by Russell. in that time period. I've not seen one of those knives, by the way. And then in around 1968 through 71, there were some German companies making these knives with the Russell trademark, unauthorized, that came into the United States. The first lot of them had black handles here and Germany stamped on them, a deep stamp Germany, so that's how you can tell that they're not original Russell knives. The second batch had bone handles like this, but the tang was stamped Germany in ink. So those knives that are bone handled, look kind of new, and don't have any tang stamp are probably German knives. Those, although they're well-made knives, they're not collectible. You know, they're not highly collectible, which these knives are, by the way. And then in 74, on their 100th anniversary, Russell-Harrington contracted with Schrade to make 12,000 Barlows. Those were made by Schrade, and those are authorized and by Russell-Harrington. In 2001, the company changed its name to Dexter Russell. So just shows you what the impact is Russell had on this company. At this point, there's really no reason to be called Russell anymore, but they choose to hold on to that heritage of John Russell, and the company is called Dexter Russell today. They still make knives like these today, Russell original design knives that just work, and very much just the way they are. Still made in 1095, thin blades. These blades are only between 2/16 and 3/16 on the bigger knives. So just a tremendous impact that John Russell had. This is a pretty nice knife. It would date, this knife here would date between around the 1930s. It's well made. This knife here is probably 1933 to 1941. Still well made, but they're just not premium knives. You know, they're just good knives. This knife here is an earlier knife, perhaps even from the 1800s. It's made in ebony and has a straight line Russell stamp on it. Just a simple single blade jack. And again, not really a premium knife, just made well. All these knives have carbon steel bolsters, carbon steel liners, and carbon steel pins. So by this time that this knife is made, most manufacturers are using brass liners and brass pins, and just better, and nickel silver bolsters. So these are just, you know, inexpensive made knives that were made well and affordable to a lot of people. So I know that's a long video, but it's a big history on this company, and I hope it gives you a lot of information on this company. These are highly collectible knives. The Russell knives pre-1949s are very collectible, and you don't find a lot of them. I went online before I made this video. There was one of the Barlows, and most of the John Russell hunting knives were in the 50 range, 50, 60. So there weren't any old ones. And so they're getting hard to find. And if you could pick one up, it's a great piece of history to have. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Really appreciate you guys, and thanks again.